Welcome, patrons! One of the major talking points in Veilguard is learning about the origins of Thedas, and in doing so, learning uncomfortable truths about history. The Chantry, or more specifically the Maker, being one of them. But how set in stone are those reveals, and is the Chantry actually as cooked as some people will make you believe? Well, let's explore that topic. A question of faith. So as Harding points out during the cutscene, a lot of the lore revelations in Veilguard suddenly throws most of the Andrastian beliefs in the bin. The Golden City is really the remains of Arlathan, which itself is a prison of the Blight. On top of that, Morrigan holding the memories of Mythal makes reference to Andraste being a carrier of Mythal, right? There is no seat of the Maker, the bride was his sham, everything is bullshit, the end. Right? I've seen a number of people upset with this, and in some cases I do understand. If you haven't been keeping up with the lore circles for the past decade, the fact that everything ever is elves can be really frustrating. But part of my confusion comes from the people who have been here for a while, because none of this is really new, or even that far off from pretty well-established fan theories dating back since the time of Origins. Arlathan being the Golden City is a theory as old as the series, only strengthened with each game's release. Even Andraste being attached to Mythal in some way has been thrown around due to the crown that she and Mythal both share, and in their similarities of stories as we learned Mythal was murdered in Inquisition. So, really, none of this should be a shock, although I do understand if you were hoping for a different answer other than elves. But I would like to challenge a few of the points I keep seeing around, as I don't think things are as concrete as a lot of you are lamenting. The identity of the Golden City. So let's talk about this without Veilguard in mind for a second. For years now, Arlathan has been thought to be the Golden or Black City. It's so ingrained in fan theories now that people just talk about it like it's fact, despite it not even being confirmed. Even in Veilguard. Yes, you heard me. Find me the source where the game directly calls the Golden City the ruins of Arlathan. Now, don't get me wrong, it talks around it, maybe even I missed it, but I could not find a line that says the two are the exact same. Frankly, the most concrete evidence we have is actually in the copy for the vinyl release, which describes the cover as being a representation of the Golden City turning black with blight and covered in ancient elven god statues. The Veilguard art book also includes some photos that make it seem like what we would think of the Golden City was part of Arlathan City. And then to add on to all of this, in stories I'm smuggling out of my time in the Veilguard Community Council, there was a version of the game where I think it was Balara, I can't quite remember who said what, but there was a line where someone turned to you and said directly that the two were the same, but it's gone now. So the intent is there, it is supposed to be. But when we talk about the lore to the series, anything in a shipped game takes priority over anything else, and Veilguard as it is now technically leaves it a little open for wiggle room to possibly be something else. The only concrete thing is that the Blight is held there and it is Elven. It could be another city. I'm also going to squeeze this in here. Some people were disappointed that the Golden City wasn't revealed to be whatever was originally on top of the mountain where Skyhold rests. But with what I just said, it could technically still be that. I'd also like to push force the theory that Skyhold was where the lighthouse originally sat. I have no other proof for that, that's just vibes. Now, all that aside, do I personally think Arlathan City is the Golden City? Yes, I do. But I want to give people the option to believe otherwise, because there is room for doubt. Like, it's small, to be fair, but, have fun with it. Andraste and Mythal. So, to begin, let's actually listen to what Morrigan says.
Spirits can't get along with fragments of each other.
Spirits, certainly. But the aspects of a self-righteous god who have walked different paths for ages? One bears the insult of her betrayal by the Evanuris, and then by Solus, as fresh wounds, insult upon injury. The other once fell in love with an Alamari chieftain and lived happily in a swamp for centuries.
Everything revolves around the words Alamari chieftain here, so let me remind you on who Mafarath is. So to begin, we do need to acknowledge that there is a ton of conflicting information on Andraste by design, so yes, what I'm building up here could easily be incorrect, but let's look at how World of Thedas Volume 2 describes Mafarath. Mafarath's father was Hagar II, his mother was Theolis. Both were prominent Alamari, their union creating a powerful tribe that controlled much of what would become Eastern Thedas. Now, I get that reading this, one could say that they were chieftains, but World of Thedas does not use those words, while it does later for Andraste's father. World of Thedas continues to refer to Mafroth as a skilled tactician or general, but never chieftain. In fact, I could not find anywhere that lists him as a chieftain, although again, I do miss things. I just mean to say that at least most things do not describe him as such. So, perhaps this is not who Morrigan was referring to. Then you might be wondering, who is she talking about? And that, my dear friends, let me guide you over to Tyrda Brightaxe, or Tyrda Brightaxe. I always mispronounce this name, and at this point, it's a joke. At this point, we're just rolling with it. I have a whole video on her, so I'm not going to go too far in depth, but Tyrda was a well-documented chieftain of the Alamari who most notably fell in love with the leaf-eared lover, Laughing Lady of the Skies. So yes, I think Morrigan is referring to when an elf carried part of Mythal and fell in love with a human woman of the Alamari. This also opens up the door to a whole other world of questions with the Avar and Alamari faith and its connection to the Evanuris, but that's a video for another day. Now, all that said, while I'm pretty convinced that Morrigan's line here is referring to Tyrda, I'm personally still of the mind that Andraste might still have been a carrier of Mythal. There have been a lot of small little weird hints that suggested over the years, but yeah, Veilguard did not confirm it. Death of the Maker. So was the Maker debunked? I think the short answer is no. With as much unknowns that surround the Maker to begin with, he could still be a real figure in Thedas. Actually, let's spin off here real quick, because I think it's likely that there is something in Thedas that likely calls itself the Maker. In Jaws of Hakon, we got a view of the Alvar religion. They worship spirits. Knowing what we know and that the elves were once spirits, this again brings into question if the first worshippers of the Evanuris were actually humans, blah blah blah, whatever. But something that is completely possible is that enough people gathered together to worship a new god that they just completely made up, and then a spirit of faith takes on the behavior of that god they worship. So, with as long as the cult of the Maker has been around, it's not only possible, but I think very likely that there is a spirit out there that was formed to take on the personality of what the Chantry believes the Maker is. So then that begs the question on if this counts. Does a spirit that watches over and protects what it thinks its children are, perhaps even being very old and helping to have guided the foundation of the Chantry, and if we want to get crazy, actually falling in love with a human Andraste, could that count as being the Maker? Or no, because it didn't make the world? Is that where the line's drawn? I don't know. But no matter what, Veilguard proves that the Chantry did get things wrong. Now again, this is old news. Even in Inquisition, Corypheus is telling us this. He saw no Maker in the Golden City. Open and shut. That was it. Well, there are two theories floating around that I want to discuss. First is a super old one, but Solus is the Maker. Now, personally, I don't love this idea, but in a literal sense, he does check off a lot of the boxes that the Chantry gives to the Maker. He made the veil. He did at one point live in the Golden City, aka where the Blight was sealed. He is responsible for the Blight, etc., etc. So technically, Solus does sort of fit into the shoes the Chantry has painted for the Maker. This is also where I'm going to save a much larger discussion on how Romance Llewellyn did ironically live up to being Andraste Reborn, becoming the bride of the Maker and ascending into the heavens to be by his side, but that's more me being a fangirl, so I'm going to spare you all. Now, the second is one that I've actually seen around before Veilguard, but I think it's really blossomed with a whole new realm of possibility since. What if the Maker are the Titans? We don't know the exact history of the Titans, but while Corypheus did not see the Maker on the throne, perhaps he did not see what it truly is. In both concept art and Solus murals, it's shown that Solus sundered the Titan souls and put them in a little blight box. This box was then sealed in the Golden City, which is locked away. Corypheus saw the blight, which is born of the Titan's pain and is part of them in some way. Maybe he did actually see the Maker, he just didn't expect it to look like that. Titans were able to create life when spirits touched just their blood. What magic were they able to produce when they were casting it willingly? They surely created the dwarves, but what else? In concept art, they are part of the land itself. Surely that counts as creating the world. This would then recontextualize the whole bit with the Chant of Light. Andraste preached that the Maker would return once the whole world sung the chant. What if the chant was the song of the Titans? The Titans' souls are lonely and lost, confused in a box after being tortured by the Evanuris for centuries, which created the Blight. What if all of creation really did sing in harmony with the Titans? Could that cure the blight for good and perhaps even revert the Titan's souls to the creatures they once were? Perhaps the folly of the Chantry is not that they were wrong, but that they don't have all the details. What if Andraste is right? What if she found out the reality of the blight and knew people wouldn't understand and adopted the myth of the Maker to help explain the cure to the blight in simple terms? The Maker and the Chantry isn't over. It's not completely debunked. My dear patrons, we just got a different angle on a viewpoint, and I'm excited what some of you are going to come up with using this new point of view. And that, dear patrons, is all that I have on the state of the Chantry. But what do you all think? Do you still have your lingering questions? Proof that I'm wrong? Comments about your own fan theory? Feel free to tag me at Dirthalen on Blue Sky, and Andraste.